and I, for one, coming from a different country, have experienced, going to university here as an international person. So I thought I would share the information that I did receive from Miami University faculty and the research they did, and trying to find ways to, better work with the students they have who come from different countries. So I am going to go ahead and begin. So I have time. There's several slides, but most of them are just probably single information, and I'll go through them really fast so that we have time for Ryan to share very important information as well. So one of the presentations that I went to, Ron Burke, talks about how to use humor in the classroom. And that's one of the challenges that I have. One, because I'm coming from a culturally different perspective where a university classroom is supposed to be serious stuff. Students are paying a lot of money. They're supposed to come into your classroom and learn content. And here is somebody who tells us that we need to engage students in some kind of laughter and enjoyment in the classroom. And I think by the end of this presentation, when I move on to the culturally perspective or culturally responsive teaching, to be specific, I'll talk about how there might be a disconnect between using humor in the classroom, and especially when you're working with international students, and how they would take your classroom seriously. Okay. Now, I put this here because, one, I am an old person. And if I put this in my classroom, most likely most of my students will not get the humor, do not understand what this is all about. But for those of us who grew up in this age and era who watched this, then you might recall the episodes and so on. I loved this really. I loved the Bundys and Married with Children. Okay. So I'm going to let the next couple of slides just roll through. So this is an introduction to an education classroom. Obviously has nothing to do with anatomy, but we're moving on to several different things. How do you catch your students' attention in the classroom? From the onset of your presentation to the end of your presentation. Now, as I told you, I'll be looking at two different presentations. One that talked about humor by Ron Burke, and the other one by some Miami faculty. And I will just briefly tell you the departments they came from. Christian Williams from the American Culture and English program. So is Dr. Doney and Dr. Dutcher. No, Dr. Dutcher is from the TESOL, or Foreign Language Education department. And then the last person, Kinghorn, is from the Department of Economics. And then Ron Burke, obviously, is from Johns Hopkins University. He is in the nursing department, and he teaches statistics. So one of his challenges was teaching statistics to nursing students. And obviously, you know that students who do not take statistics as a major, who are required to take some kind of research class, and they have to take a statistical class, find it challenging to go through a statistical class and all the math and all the numbers and all the software that they have to plug in information and all the data they need to collect. It is a requirement. It is necessary for all of them. But essentially, they would need to find something that would make the class exciting. So for him, that was his reason for going into, how can I use humor in my classroom so that my students are engaged? All right, so let's begin with an unscientific, statistically biased, sloppy survey. Are you using humor in your teaching or in your presentations as you go on? So I'm going to pass these. You will realize that I have retained the information about the copyright information because it is not mine. And he shared this with us during his presentation. And I am going to ask you to try and fill those out. And let's see what you score.
Yeah, there's some pencils back here. Need a pencil? Yeah. There's some.
So about a minute.
Here's your survey. Here's your pencil.
So, how did we do? I know when I went to this presentation, I scored low. Very low. Okay, because my PowerPoints typically have information, content, and more content, and references to page numbers, and the resource page and all that. And if I do put pictures, it's maybe images of something that is relevant. Like if it's an assistive technology, I have an image of the assistive technology. So it still links to content. But I rarely pick images that just are there for the sake of amusement and entertainment and engagement. And his philosophy was try and put those in your presentation at different points in your presentation for various reasons. One, to catch their attention. Two, for them to be able to retain whatever that information was at that point. And then finally, just for you to have a more engaged classroom. All right. Any of these in particular that you do not use at all, that you have never used at all? Use them at different times, maybe once in a while, different presentations, plug in one of these items, okay? I know for stories, for the most part, I had never used stories before this presentation. So anecdotes or little snippets of stories, I never used those. Multiple choice jokes. Top 10 list. Images. A lot of times we use a lot of images. Sometimes complex images as well. Sound effects. Depends. I've used them once in a while. Movement and animation. For various reasons, it takes time to develop. It really takes a lot of time to develop, especially if you want to put any kind of animation. Music and video clips. I've used videos a lot when it comes to demonstrations and those kinds of things, but music clips, not as often. So why do we need to use humor? He says, one, it improves the classroom connection between you and the student. I think you will see this come in a variety of ways. Your students tend to feel relaxed, especially the position, the relationship, the positionality of you being the faculty and them being the student. There's always that gap between you and the students. So to bridge that gap so that they feel comfortable and you feel approachable, that maybe you can use humor to lighten the mood in the classroom, and then they know that they can engage with you. Engage your students by bringing some of the deadly, boring, content-specific information to life. I know one of the things that he talked about in his presentations, statistics, is very difficult to teach. And he talked about teaching it sometime in the afternoon when it's really hot, and then people just had lunch and everybody's sleepy and nobody really wants to pay attention, and everybody's looking at the time so that they can leave. So it brings some of the contents to life so that you do not have this kind of a classroom, which is typical of some of my classrooms sometimes, and try and have this kind of a classroom where everybody's up and awake and trying to engage with you. I think this day and age, I need to try and say this correctly. This day and age, the younger generation are so engaged with technology. And they're so engaged with things that move quickly. So if you're slow paced, you're still trying to explain, and it's something that it's information that they can go and look up, then you're wasting their time. Okay? So well-paced, fast-paced, including anecdote and stories and humor in your presentation really helps. It enhances creativity, that's what he says, that if you engage students in some kind of humorous activities and they laugh a lot in your classroom, they can be creative. Now this is what he means. They can be creative because they know you do not have boundaries. Because you have opened the boundaries. You have pretty much told them that you are, I don't want to say laid back professor, because that sounds like you are, you're not taking your work seriously, but you have room for them to be very creative, right? You're not going to limit them. You're not going to be too rigid and too strict and too focused in one way and not allowing them to do things their own way. Because a lot of the populations we have right now in this century, they're very, very creative. And they think outside the box. It facilitates communication. I think I've talked about that already. So there's a relationship between you and the students. Arouses attention and engagement. If you throw those in there, and you have a couple of students who are not awake, and the ones who are awake laugh or listen to or start talking and chatting, then the others who are not paying attention will want to know what's going on so that they can be part of the classroom. So throwing those in there at various points will be very helpful. Improves understanding, retention, and memory. They will remember some of those sections that you had plugged in different items in your presentation. And that helps them recall, especially if you're going to test them. They'll be able to recall that information. It relaxes students. As I say, he presented all these information, but they kind of are linked, because if they're relaxed, they will be creative, they have a good relationship with you. All those are kind of intertwined. Encourages open-mindedness, obviously the creativity as well. Increases your relationship with the students. Positive mood and cooperative classroom atmosphere. He talks about 6 effective humor techniques. And I think I've kind of mentioned these in passing as I presented. He talked about anecdotes, multiple choice formats, visual images, music and sound effects, videos, and top 10 list. When we talk about top 10 lists, one of the things I think about, you've listened to David Letterman. Hi, he's very sad. I loved him very much. But he typically had a top 10 list of something. Every time he presented, he had a top 10 list of something ridiculous, something that has to do with politics, something that has to do with current events, something that's happening within that week. He'd form a top 10 list of something that's relevant to people. So, what I'm going to do is I'm going to share some of these techniques, and then as you listen or watch and share what you think of these techniques, maybe you can retain and select some of the ones that you think you can use in your own classroom or in your own presentations. As faculty, we do a lot of presentations in different places, and you have obviously a class that you teach. Select the ones that you think you can use. All right, so I'm going to start with this. Top 10 unusual newspaper headlines. I hope it's spaced enough for you to be able to. I'm being too fast.
To read them to me.
One thing about technology. One thing about technology is I thought I paced them so that they would come very quickly,
Yeah.
but not. And I think I had music in the background and I can't hear it. So as much as you try to make things humorous, things could go wrong. And I think when I played it, it worked, but it's not working right now. So anyway, the headlines are correct, except that they have more than one interpretation. So that's why it was put in the top 10 list. So what about ways to avoid taxes? Please don't take notes. Please do not do that one. You will get caught.
Are made in cash. There you go, poor teacher. And no
So
one told you.
claim you were born before the taxes and no one told you. April 14 is next week.
Yes, it is. We have to the 18th this year.
Oh, we do?
It's a weekend, yes.
Ah.
Live in a cardboard box.
We do have this small, what do they call the small houses?
Yeah.
Becoming very, very tiny house, very popular. And the last one that is taking too long, claim your house is its own country and it has tax-free laws.
That's the one I'm
Now, this video that I have here is actually by Ron himself. So he's trying to, obviously he moved beyond just presentations. He's had several. He's had several keynote speeches. He's been invited to several different events. He's presented at several different conferences. He has published a lot on this, and he's not the only one. So several different people have published on this. And now he's moved to the point where he is a consultant. So he is selling his own product, which is humor. Let's see if this works here.
May I ask you a question? If YouTube videos are so effective as communication and marketing tools, why aren't you using them in your teaching, training, or presentations? They can be embedded in any PowerPoint.
You want answers? I think I'm entitled. You want answers? I want the truth. You can't handle the truth.
And it's very important that you cite your sources so that you're not plagiarizing. So obviously I cited him at the end of this presentation. And that one was a link that was not embedded, and sometimes you can embed the presentations like this. So this is a second example.
Music in PowerPoint? Why would you ever use music to communicate your message? There are more than a dozen reasons, plus buckets of research.
Most of them from him.
One study just published that found listening to familiar songs will release dopamine, which produces feel-good signals and an emotional connection.
All right, so I did give examples of top 10 lists. We did music, videos, and this is just a little story. It's actually a poem, but I only selected one section of the poem. And the citation is at the end. If you could please read real quickly, or I could read it. Dr. Seuss explains computers. When the copy of your floppies getting sloppy on the disk and the microcode instructions cause unnecessary risk, then you have to flash your memory, and you'll want a RAM to RAM your ROM. Quickly turn off the computer and be sure to tell your mom. It's a longer poem than that. This one is also a very short story, so I'm going to read it. There I was, that is a mistake, but I did get it off the way it is. It's sitting at the bar, staring at my drink, when a large troublemaker biker steps up next to me, grabs my drink and gulps it down in one swig. Well, what you gonna do about it, he says, menacingly, as I bust into tears. Come on, man, the biker says. I didn't think you'd cry. Something is scrolling on my screen, so I have to wait. I didn't think you'd cry. I can't stand to see a man crying. This is the worst day of my life, I say. I'm a complete failure. I was late to a meeting and my boss fired me. When I went to the parking lot, I found my car had been stolen and I don't have any insurance. I left my wallet in the cab I took home. I found my old lady in bed with a gardener, and then my dog bit me. So I came to this bar to work up the courage to put an end to it all. I buy a drink, I drop a capsule in, and sit here watching the poison dissolve. Then you Jack A, show up and drink the whole thing. But enough about me, how's your day? So just embedding those in there. And when you pick the stories, they don't necessarily have to relate to the class content. It's just anything. How can you tell you're an internet addict? You prefer to be contacted by email. People think you're bilingual because you speak in HTML. You no longer own a car because you sold it on an online auction. And tech support refers their tough questions to you. So which is the right answer? Obviously. All of the above. All right. Now, how and where to infuse the humor in the opening section of your PowerPoint. So, you can do music at the beginning as they're setting up, sitting down, just have some kind of story for them to read. He suggests that you do it throughout your presentation. So, beginning, mid, end. And throughout doesn't mean that every content followed by some humor, content followed by some humor. That going to be too much, but opening, maybe some kind of midpoint, when you're having breaks, you can do commercial breaks. He does a lot of commercial breaks from actual commercials. And most of his commercials he uses are Super Bowl commercials. And those are usually typically short and very humorous and used for a short period of time. And then you can also include it during your closing at the very end. He also cautions that there are some things you need to avoid. So if I did use any of these during my presentation, I will go ahead and apologize in advance. If I did use any kind of offensive humor, I apologize. Put downs, sarcasm, ridicule, profanity, please avoid that. And I think it did show up somewhere, not too much. Sexual content or innuendos, attacks on people and their characteristics. I think that is, for the most part, very critical. Make sure you're very sensitive to individuals. Your sensitive personal experiences. I know sometimes as professors, some professors share very personal information in an effort to create a relationship with the students. Sometimes it works, sometimes it does not work, okay? Because you might talk about something that's very personal to you and it's very sensitive and it affects, maybe it's something that's a little more traumatic for one of the other students. So now you have just triggered, some kind of memory that maybe should not have been triggered. And then any videos or images that represent any of those items that I have listed. So there's 3 domains of non-offensive humor. He talks about professional humor. So if you're going to professional conferences, anything that, for example, you're presenting to teachers. So it's a conference that focuses on university faculty. Obviously, you have university faculty humor, so you can use that, something that you can connect with other faculty members. If you have international students, think about your classroom and use the appropriate humor for that classroom. Make sure it's culture-specific humor. Well, you can use, let me not say make sure it is, you can use culture-specific humor if you have a population that would relate. So for example, the first one that I had would relate to people my age and older, not to the younger population. I think my children would find me showing that very ridiculous. And then also sometimes think about using culture-free or generic humor, something that is general and does not target a specific group or a specific culture. That is very important. And now moving from the culture-free and generic humor, I'm going to move on to the research that was developed by the faculty members from Miami, the ones that I had introduced at the beginning. Somebody had a question? No, I should ask. Any questions about using those items in your classroom? Or how many of you think you will maybe embed a few of those things in your classroom? Which one's most likely?
I have met Ron Burke and been to his presentations, and when I came back, I remember I tried the top 10. Now that Letterman's retired, do you think students will get it? I mean, what we're doing, or do we have to explain that? It's like, it's so tough.
I don't know how many of them actually watch it, because he's still our generation. I don't know if the younger, I think under 20s might not get it. If you have master's level students, they will definitely.
They will still remember it.
Yes, they will get it.
I have a really difficult time not making it connected to my lecture or my topic. It's the teacher in me. It's really difficult to do that, but I remember using it as a wrap-up to say what were the top 10 things you learned about student teaching. And then it wasn't funny that much. I mean, I was trying to be funny, and then it wasn't.
And then everybody's quiet because.
Much for coming, and Beverly and Ryan both said they could stay a little bit if you need to ask any specific questions. Thank you again for coming. Thank you, Ryan. We appreciate your time. Thank you, Sarah. Bye.
Hi. So sorry.
Have you used any of these resources that Ryan talks about? Writing Center. You use this
You want me to log you off this computer, Beverly?
Hello? you have any idea what else we could do that would help? There's a math lab. Do you know that? Do you go to the math lab? Thank you, Joe. It was right here. Okay. They said they need help with that. They go to the writing center. Wow. There is a math lab.
Oh, there's a math lab, right?
Sure, yeah. It's
So they
staffed,
know a lot about education.
Yes.
yeah, it's staffed from 8 a.m. to like 6 or 7 p.m. in the evening by students to get that help. Yeah, it's actually.
I have never directed them. I know I work with students on capstone projects. One of the things I require for them to do is make sure this has gone to the writing center.
Yeah.
Before it's actually come to the.
One of the best math labs I've ever seen. I mean, it's.
So they don't, I've talked to John and asked him what they're doing for the international students in the math lab, because she specifically said we have no one else that's statistics.
I'll tell you what.
Do we have links when they go to SIPA, the website?
I don't know. I have not given the site a total overhaul, but it's probably something we definitely need to have. And I think one of the most important things I started doing with my previous university was coming up with a list of and so at Marshall, and this was at my Marshall university, we
Last Friday,
the university's department to basically because not all people know how to buy their net. But if you have someone say, oh, you're going to be a business major, you need to go see this person because we know they're going to help you get registered and so on.
Good question.
So
Can you
forth
come get
across the
it?
university. So then we can
Would
hand that
we
out.
are.
would the designated faculty come in and get a briefing, for example, from you?
Absolutely.
The
Yeah.
other thing.
Yes, we'll email you.
Resources and.
Very good.
And
We'll send you an email with the
we're
certificates ready.
rapidly
We did
growing
find a stamp. Is that gonna work?
So
Okay.
it's something we have to have in place. So because
You need
if
that.
you have, for example,
They wanna know how many hours.
Okay.
Okay.
It's a good one, he's the advisor to 3D design gaming, and send him over there. He wouldn't necessarily, for example,
Do you think I could just
advise
write it
on
on it?
but maybe someone else in that department does, and so they can be the advisor.
They wish we could write.
Yeah,
And
oh,
so,
I tried, I teach citation. Oh, my
This one
I
on
don't think
teaching
so,
is
no.
unless
it was one like planted from the computer, but there was no microphone.
So much was coming
This is
out.
it right here.
All the
Yes.
good students to try to avoid
Yes,
this.
I think that's the last one.
Yeah, because,
For teaching. Next year, we are unsure yet.
Did it record?
people are using this.